Hi there, this is Gary Short with Gibraltar Software, and in this video I'm going to continue to show you how to get up and running quickly with Gibraltar Analyst. In previous videos I've shown you how to get your application to log information to Gibraltar Analyst via writing code in your classes and in your methods. In this particular video I'm going to show you how to do that in a more declarative manner just by decorating your classes and your methods with attributes. The way of doing this is known as aspect-oriented programming, but a description of aspect-oriented programming, or AOP, is out with the scope of this video. We have enabled Gibraltar Analyst for aspect-oriented programming by using a library called PostSharp by Sharp Crafters. You can get more information on this library and on aspect-oriented programming in general from their website at sharpcrafters.com. So as usual, I have some demonstration code here that I want to walk you through, and this is the application that we're going to enable for Gibraltar Analyst. But let me just walk you through it before we do that. So first of all, I've declared an exception here because I want to throw and catch an exception later on in my code. Then inside the main method here, I make two calls to methods. I make a call to trace method here, which is a method that we're going to trace later on, which takes a parameter, a string parameter, and we've passed in hello world. And then I call a method called durations, which we're going to use to model this idea that different methods can be called for different amounts of time, can be called at different numbers of times and can take different amounts of time to complete based on what they're required to do, whether they're connecting to a database or whatever. And then we close out the trace. So here's our trace method. As we can see, it takes a parameter, it throws an error which we catch and then swallow. This idea of catching an exception and then swallowing it can make life very difficult for support engineers who have to trace through a problem if there's an exception thrown and then being swallowed, and we're going to see how Gibraltar Software can help us with that. And then we just return true at the end. Down here we have our durations method, and a durations method is going to call this method here, which consumes a lot of time. It's going to consume a random amount of time, as we can see, and it's going to be called a random number of times. Then the next one is going to consume a random amount of time, but not quite so much, and again will be called for a random amount of time. And then the third one again will be called a random amount of times and will take again a random amount of time to complete, but again not so much as the previous one. Here you can see the methods that I've written: consumes lots of time, consumes medium time, consumes little time, and all they do actually, as you can see, is to put the thread to sleep for that particular duration. At the bottom we finish off with just our function or our method, which throws the error that we talked about previously. So that's our demonstration application that we want to enable for use with Gibraltar Analyst. It's fairly straightforward. So now let's just go ahead and enable our application. The first thing we need to do, of course, is to make our references. So we want to grab hold of our project, and we want to add library package reference, switch on to online, and in the online search we want to search for Gibraltar. And just wait for that to be found. See how quickly the internets are working tonight. Not too bad at all. Here's the package that we want to install, the gibraltar.agent.postscript package. So let's install that. So that's going to install everything that we need and add those references. So we can now close that down. If we close down the references here, you can also see that in the app.config the package has actually added everything that we need to get Gibraltar Analyst up and running in a sort of basic way. So that's everything that we need added. So let's just go ahead now and actually use those attributes to enable our application for Gibraltar Analyst. First thing we're going to do is to add the using statement. So we want to add gibraltar.agent.postscript, which is there, and this will enable us to add our attributes. So if you have a look at our best practices document, one of the things that we say is that you should have all exceptions logged. This is a very cheap thing to do, and so we want all of our methods to log any exceptions thrown inside them. So the quick way to enable that is just at the class level, just to add the GException attribute there. And through attribute multicasting, that is going to enable every method inside that class to log exceptions to Gibraltar Analyst. The next thing we want to do is to go down to the method that we want to trace, which is this one here, the trace method. And here we want to add gtrace. Gtrace. Now we'll talk about the information that gtrace is going to actually trace for us when we look at it in Gibraltar Analyst itself. It's always easier to do it that way. But if we add trace here, then that's going to trace a lot of information for us. And the last thing that we want to do is we want to have a look at the timing of how long it takes to run these particular functions here. Now what I could do is I could add the GTimer attribute to each of these methods in turn. However, I'm far too lazy to do that, to be honest, and there's a quicker way of doing it. So if we go back to the class level, and again by taking advantage of the attribute multicasting functionality, what we can actually do is add it at the class level. Now of course we don't want all of the methods inside this class to be timed, so what we can do is we add the GTimer attribute like so, and then inside the brackets we can actually use attribute target members. There we go. So if we use attribute targets members, and then we set that to equal, and any member which starts consume anything like so, and that will give us the GTimer functionality on all of the members that start with consume, i.e. the 3 that we want to watch. Okay, so that's all we have to do to get this up and running. Just simply decorate our class and our methods with these attributes. So let's go ahead now and see what we can actually see within Gibraltar Analyst. So let's run that now. Then I'll go to work. These functions will be called a random number of times and will take a random amount of time to complete. And there it's finished. So if we go down here now and we open up Gibraltar Analyst, we can see in the local sessions under the PostSharp demo, which was the name of the application that I created, we do actually have a session in here. So if we open that up, you can see here by using the trace attribute, what's happened is you can see a timestamp of when the program went into the trace method. We can see inside the trace method that an exception was thrown. So before we have a look at that, let's just go in and have a little look at the information that gets passed forward to Gibraltar Analyst. So we go into the trace method. Let's just double click here. We can see that we've gone into the trace method, and we can see what parameter we passed at the time of calling. So that's very useful. Close that down. We can see that an exception was thrown. That's because we decorated the class with the exception attribute. We can see that exception was thrown, so if we double click on that, we can get more information here about the exception, and of course the actual exception itself was passed forward into Gibraltar Analyst. Close that down, and we can see from the trace attribute that we've got a timestamp of when the program actually exited. So if we open that up, we can see on the exit information we get the duration, how long that method took to complete, and the fact that it returned true at the end. So another thing that we can do, the timer, the GTimer attribute that we decorated our class with, will give us some metrics, and we can actually graph those metrics. So if we click on new view here and say we want a new chart, inside the PostSharp here, we just drag this over here and we drop that down. we'll take, we'll have it grouped by method. We'll take the average duration, sort by duration descending, and we'll have that as an area chart, I think. Just drop that on there. So here we can see the three methods that we wanted to time. There's consume lots of time there, consume medium time here, and consume little time at the end. And we can see that the average time to run was 44 milliseconds there, 34 milliseconds there, and 14 milliseconds there. We can do something else though, and what we can do to make that to capture, to show all of the information that we catch, if we pop open that menu and select Add Series, instead of taking the duration, we can actually take a count. So how many times was the method called? Because if you recall, we were calling that method a random number of times, and we can add a line there. So if we add that, we can see that consume lots of times was called 80 times, medium time was 77, and consume little time was called 70 times. So let's just pop back to our code. Okay, so in this video then, I've shown you that one of the quickest ways to get up and starting with Gibraltar Analyst is to take an aspect-orientated programming approach, or a more declarative approach, and decorate your class or your functions with the particular attributes that pull out the information that you want. That's all I'm going to demonstrate to you in this video. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.